Thus, today she is the Vice President for Equity and Inclusion and a Professor of Sociology at the University of New Mexico. Her research interests include African Americans' women access to mobile technology, making the work of marginalized scholars more accessible, and environmental justice health activism. She has published 5 books spanning these topics, the latest of which is African American Women, ICT and Neoliberal Politics, The Challenge of Gender Digital Divides to People-Centered Governance, which was published in 2019. This is the first part of our Brown Bag Lunch webinar series, and Dr. Zerai will be discussing equity and inclusion among staff at UNM, consideration for the UNM 2040 strategic plan. And without further ado, Dr. Zerai.
Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen. All right, and start the thing here. Start. Okay. Now we're all set. Well, thanks so much for joining us today. We're looking forward to this discussion with you. I'll let you know that when I was invited to host this conversation, that the request was also made that I would talk about combating racism and implicit bias. And so you will see that interwoven through the presentation. And so we're going to start off with the land acknowledgement statement. And here we are. Founded in 1889, the University of New Mexico sits on the traditional homelands of the Pueblo of Sandia, the original peoples of New Mexico, Pueblo, Navajo, Apache, since time immemorial, have deep connections to the land and have made significant contributions to the broader community statewide. We honor the land itself and those who remain stewards of this land throughout the generations, and also acknowledge our committed relationship to Indigenous peoples. We gratefully recognize this history. And so in the Division of Equity and Inclusion, we have been working around the theme of expanding opportunity and cultivating genius, and that's the genius of all in our community, including our staff. And we are realizing this goal in a number of ways. A couple that I will point out are that we've been building more diverse pools for faculty and staff searches, that we are working on climate issues and units, including planning for a university-wide climate survey, and also educating administrators, faculty, and staff to be better mentors, supervisors, and colleagues to all employees. And so the objectives for today's presentation are to share our adaptation of the NADOE's 3-dimensional model of diversity, so you have a sense of the communities that we seek to serve in our work. Also to examine UNM's both university and main campuses staff data by race and gender, just so you have a sense of that information. I'll introduce some organizational theory and educational research, examining the strengths of diverse and inclusive academic groups and how to reduce the impact of implicit bias. I'll explore ways that staff perspectives are crucial to achieving the university's mission, and then finally conclude with asking you about your thoughts concerning staff-centered considerations in the UNM 2040 strategic plan. And so I'm not going to belabor this couple of slides, but just as I said, I want you to understand that the work that we do in the Division of Equity and Inclusion is very much based in the literature concerning diversity in higher ed and evidence-based practices. And so the National Association of Diversity Officers in Higher Ed have created a model of higher education diversity, which we've modified a little bit to fit our unique experiences and groups here in New Mexico. And we look at social identity characteristics of students, faculty, and staff on our campus. You see on the left side that there are a number of focal groups that we address, and then a number of core areas. And the strategy is to diversify social characteristics among the focal groups. Oops. And equity is actually the goal, so that social identity characteristics are not determinative of access to opportunity and total inclusion in all core areas. And so with that in mind, the fact that we want to make sure that equity is happening, that regardless of where you come from, what your culture is, what your language is, that you have access to all of those core areas that were noted on the last slide, it's important for us to have a sense of who our staff are at UNM. Now, this data that I'm sharing with you is publicly available. It's on the Office of Institutional Analytics website. And we're going to look at two slides here. One is staff at UNM in terms of all campuses, so main, branches, and HSC. And so that's what you're looking at here. And then the next slide will be focused on main campus. And so in terms of all of the campuses, we have almost 5,000 staff who are regular staff. And so that's the red line. We'll just focus on the 2019 data. And so you see in the red area there, it says 4943. And so that's the almost 5,000 staff that I'm talking about. And then in the gray area, those are temporary staff. And so that is a little over 1,600 for a total of almost 6,600 staff at all of our campuses. And then at the bottom of the slide, you'll see the breakdown in terms of race and ethnicity. Our Latino staff are 38% of our overall staff numbers. Native staff are 4%. Black staff are only 1.7%. Asian staff are a low number 2%. And white staff are 47% of those overall. And then you see the breakdown on the right side of full and part-time staff and of women versus men. And you see that women are the majority on all the campuses. I have done these breakdowns by ethnicity and race at the end of the slide deck. So I'm not going to go into all of those now, but I'll be sharing my slide deck with you in case you want to look at that information on your own. And so as promised, here is the information for main campus. And actually the percentages I just read were from main campus. So sorry about that. I skipped a slide here in my printout. And so again, you see that altogether on main campus, we have just over 3,400 staff. The majority are regular staff and 727 are temporary staff. And so I won't talk about the ethnic differences because I just told you those. Very core to our mission is the academic success of our students. And so this slide gives you a sense of the 6-year baccalaureate degree rates by race and ethnicity. And I'll just let you take a look at those. I'm not going to dig into this, but just again, to give you a sense of the context that we're in terms of these demographics and student success. And so why does diversity matter? The National Center for Educational Statistics recently projected that minorities will become the majority of the K-12 population in the United States. And given that they estimated that that would happen by 2014, it has likely already happened. And that majority will steadily widen according to the demographic numbers that we have. And so when you think about a society that's diversifying, this really means that we need to broaden the circle of opportunity because this kind of equity is really a matter of international competitiveness. According to a professor from Rice University, Minority young people are the nation's future workers, consumers, and taxpayers. If more of them don't obtain the education and training needed to reach the middle class, the US will become a poorer and less competitive society. And so thinking about the changing demographics of the society are really important when we think about why diversity matters. So diversity not only matters, but in my mind provides a strategic advantage when we're thinking about that combination and balance between diversity, equity, and inclusion. So diversity benefits our university mission in a number of ways. Diverse working groups are more productive, creative, and innovative, according to the research of Cedric Herring and others. Ideas that are generated by diverse groups are of higher quality. The level of critical analysis of decisions and alternatives is also higher in groups exposed to minority viewpoints. And so I'm going to be sharing some of the research that has led to these findings with you. So in a study from 2006 to 2014, and this was an international study of businesses across the world, they found that companies with one or more women on their board of directors outperformed those without women on the board by 18% in Europe, 20% in the US, and 55% in Asia. And so the chart shows you that. And so the gray line shows those companies that had one or more women on their board. And so you see them outperforming the other companies with no women on their boards. And you see that there is a decrease there in 2009 due to the economic downturn at that time. And you see also that those companies that had one or more women on their board bounced back faster and better than those that did not have women on their boards. And so in the research, we're able to show that diverse groups are more productive. We want our representation at UNM to reflect the diversity of the communities in which we live and work. And so this figure shows you the balance between diversity and inclusion. And so if you have diversity, if you don't have diversity and inclusion, according to the Society for Women Engineers who created this figure, you have a workplace that is, they just call it a bad workplace. It's not diverse, you're not getting new ideas in, and there is that problem of group think that's happening because you don't have those diverse ideas. So if you have diversity without inclusion, so looking at the top left quadrant of the figure, then you'll have those who are coming from diverse backgrounds, feeling isolated. Often there's very high turnover, and that is definitely not the best situation. So your target is really to have that correct balance between diversity and inclusion. And inclusion, we want people to feel that they belong, that they're respected, that they bring value, and that they're encouraged to thrive. And so we're going to be talking about some ways to create a more inclusive environment in our workplaces. Current theory says that diversity that's beneficial to organizations requires inclusion, equity, and access. Citing human resource literature, the Society for Women Engineers argue that diversity and inclusion are synergistic. And so this refers back to that last figure that you just took a look at. Diversity does not work without inclusion, and inclusion doesn't make sense without diversity. Decision-making, the reason that diversity and inclusion work together and that they lead to innovation is that decision-making improves when teams embrace different points of view, independence of thought, and the sharing of specialized knowledge. Diverse groups are almost always better on sophisticated problem-solving tasks than homogeneous groups, because accommodating different experiences breaks down the risk of groupthink. Work groups that make the time to openly discuss conflict and that want to learn from all perspectives can reap the greatest benefits of diversity through the development of an inclusive culture. So I have a lot of resources that where folks have done research to look into this and to look at that balance of diversity and inclusion, and also to look at what happens when you have a homogeneous group versus a diverse group and the kinds of outcomes. And so at the end of the presentation, you'll see a list of sources, and I even have more for you if you're interested. So just reach out to us at diverse@unm.edu, and I'm happy to share those sources with you. Educational institutions suffer turnover, missed opportunities, and low morale when they lose someone's contribution because they feel they don't belong. Overlooking and underutilizing the full potential of students and employees often happens when unconscious or implicit bias is at play. And so we'll be talking a little bit about what unconscious bias is and ways to reduce its impact in the workplace. At their best, diversity and inclusion efforts work together to cultivate an empathetic understanding in leaders and colleagues that allows them to value each other as individuals and as whole people in a holistic way that appreciates and embraces their culture and all the aspects of who they are. Because really it's when we bring our full selves to the workplace, not feeling that we have to sort of cut off aspects of our personalities or our culture and leave them at home. It's when we bring those full selves to bear that we're able to make the greatest contribution to be the most creative and most innovative. And so one of the issues with creating a diverse environment is the underrepresentation of women and minority groups in the workplace. And so, you know, we looked at the data a few minutes ago, and while our numbers of Latinx folks are very good at UNM, and our numbers and percentages of Native staff are very good relative to many other institutions, both numbers could be higher. And certainly our numbers and percentages of Asian and African American staff are extremely low. And among Black staff, you'll see, if you take a look at my slides at the end of the slide deck, that those numbers have been dwindling. And so why are certain minorities and women underrepresented at UNM and in academia more broadly? And so, as I said, there's been so many scholars who've done research on this topic. And all of that research is kind of broken down into two areas. And so there are supply side or pipeline factors that result in a smaller pool of applicants to jobs. Often this is cited as the main reason for the lack of diversity, excuse me, in hiring. Excuse me. However, demand side factors, excuse me, such as implicit or unconscious bias, result also in lower preferences for women. I'm gonna have to get a coffee. And so it's two, supply side and demand side. Supply side are the idea that there just aren't enough minorities. And demand side is the idea that implicit bias is preventing those minorities from making it into pools of finalists and from being hired. And so this figure gives you a sense of some of the demand side issues. So even if we have strong egalitarian values and believe that we're not biased, we still may behave in ways that are discriminatory, according to this research that's cited. This is because our judgments are shaped by the biology of efficiency. The brain is really designed to predict and to fill in blanks. And also it's shaped by a lifetime of experience and cultural history. This leads to implicit bias and also stereotyping. And it applies to a variety of social characteristics, a variety of types of decisions. And so it doesn't just come into play in terms of hiring, it comes into play in many different areas. And those characteristics are not only race, class, and gender, but even age and height. And so an example from height, when shown photographs of people of the same height, evaluators overestimated men's heights and underestimated women's heights, even though a reference point such as a doorway was provided. So these decisions were based on the assumptions that people have about men being taller than women. And so this comes into play in that way, but also, unfortunately, in terms of hiring. So this slide talks about biases in selecting applicants and perceptions of skills. So resumes of applicants with white sounding and male names in this study were more likely to be interviewed for open positions than were qualified applicants, equally qualified applicants with African American sounding and female names. And so they took a set of resumes and randomly assigned white sounding and male names and African American sounding and female names to the very same set of qualifications. And these were the results. In another study, when rating the quality of verbal skills as indicated by vocabulary definitions, evaluators rated skills lower if an African American provided the definition than if a white person provided them. And so we have evidence showing this kind of racial bias. Gender biases are also prevalent in a broad nationwide sample of folks in STEM professions that were evaluating applicant materials for an undergrad student in a laboratory. And again, similar to the other study, the materials were the same. They just randomly assigned male or female names to the application materials. The professors then rated the applicants on 4 categories: competence, hireability, amount of mentoring that they would offer, and likability. And so let's take a look at the results. See here. So in terms of competence, and by the way, there you see the blue is male and the kind of red color is female. So in terms of competence, men were rated higher. In terms of hireability, men were rated higher. In terms of mentoring, men were rated higher. And again, these were the same materials, just male versus female names. But in terms of likability, interestingly, women were moving on to the next slide here. So gender biases have also been shown in terms of letters of recommendation. And so, you know, you're not going to go ask a random person for a letter of recommendation. These are coming from people you've worked with, who you believe are going to rate you in a positive manner. But despite that fact, we're able to see that there are gender biases in the ways that these letters are written. And so there was a study of over 300 letters of recommendation for chemical and biochemical applicants. And they found that letters written on behalf of women tended to be shorter, provide minimal assurances, include more doubt raisers. They portrayed women as students as opposed to portraying men as professionals. And they more frequently mentioned women's personal lives. And so what can you do to be a change agent at UNM? Well, what you can do is to advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so we're going to talk about a few ways that you can do that. And I'm going to double check my time here. All right. So first of all, let's think about some shortcuts that contribute to implicit bias. And I'm just going to click them all on the screen at one time. So negative stereotypes is one of the types of shortcuts. So presumptions that women or minorities are incompetent. And in fact, there is a presumption of incompetence book that you can read to learn more about some of those experiences among women and minorities. Another one of the shortcuts, and by shortcuts what I mean is if we don't give ample time to rate an applicant for a position or to get to know someone new that we're working with, or to really fairly evaluate the work of those that we supervise. These are shortcuts that, due to the brain's efficiency, I'll put efficiency in quotes because it ends up not being very efficient for people of color. These kinds of shortcuts are often made. And so there's research in neuroscience that shows this. So these are some shortcuts that we want you to be aware of so that you can guard against taking them, making sure that you do take enough time to evaluate applicants, take enough time to get to know your colleagues, and to evaluate those that you supervise. And so snap judgments are another one of the shortcuts. And those are judgments with insufficient evidence. Positive stereotypes are another type of shortcut. So we know that there are model minorities, the whole idea of the model minority, and that Asians, for example, might be assumed to do really well with tasks concerning statistics or math. And so that would be a quote unquote positive stereotype and presumption of competence. But you might have somebody who actually needs some extra training and help and support, yet you're just assuming that they already know how to do something. And so even positive stereotypes can be a shortcut that contributes to bias. Cloning is another shortcut. And so if you are hiring someone to work in your unit and someone comes in for the application who's just like you, they are introverted like you, or they have dreadlocks like you, or other ways that they seem to be just like you, and then for some uncertain reason you just feel an affinity for this person and that they're going to do a great job. And so that's in the research what we refer to as cloning. And so obviously that can be an issue if you have a person who is completely unlike you, but could offer something amazing to your workplace, and also bring in that diversity so that you have the opportunity to create more innovation because you have different new ideas coming in. And so that's another shortcut that you want to guard against. And then finally, euphemized bias is another shortcut. And this is, I've sat on search committees before where a candidate is being discussed, and words like the person is visionary, they're a star, they're committed, they're focused. These words that are used often because cloning is at play, but not on the basis of the person's actual characteristics or experiences or achievements. That's what euphemized bias is. And so obviously that can also create a shortcut that contributes to bias. So there are some evidence-based behavioral strategies to guard against these specific shortcuts and implicit bias generally. One is to intentionally replace stereotypes. And so if women are being portrayed as math challenged, and you grow up with this idea, you know, when you're in school that girls are math challenged, identify this as a gender stereotype and replace it with accurate information. So take a look at hidden figures and, you know, get yourself exposed to accurate information in terms of gender and that stereotype. Use positive counter stereotypic imaging is another way, another behavioral-based strategy, evidence-based behavioral strategy. So before evaluating job applicants for a position traditionally held by white men, imagine in detail an effective Native woman leader or scientist for that position. Take your time to focus on specific information about a colleague or applicant to prevent group stereotypes from leading to potentially inaccurate assumptions. Ask questions, get underneath why they do what they do and what they do so that you can understand it as opposed to, again, making assumptions about it. And finally, create and take advantage of opportunities for contact with counter-stereotypic exemplars. So for example, meet with a senior Latina administrator at UNM to discuss their ideas and vision. And we have some amazing ones here that I'm sure you would benefit from talking to. So one of the things that we want you to be aware of is that people of color and women have to pay something called diversity taxes. And it's the idea that as opposed to accumulated advantage, they have cumulative professional disadvantage. And so when you have a person of color who has experienced these disadvantages, and yet they still rise to the top in terms of an applicant for a position or a very strong worker in your unit, just know that they have overcome a lot to get to that point. And so some of those taxes that we want to make you aware of is those assumptions and stereotypes and implicit biases that we've been talking about. Often isolation in the profession is something that people of color and women have had to overcome. And isolation is a real thing because we are social learners. And often the sort of implicit unofficial education in a setting, on-the-job education in a setting, is happening when you're interacting with your colleagues. And so that isolation is a huge tax. Excessive demands and assignments is something that we know that often faculty of color, for example, who are expected to mentor all the students of color often deal with. Inadequate mentoring is an issue. And I could spend a whole seminar talking about each of these. And so if you would like more information, please ask and I'll get into it a little more. Less extensive informational networks, alienation and lack of recognition is another issue. And often cultural issues of modesty and lack of self-promotion also contribute to that cumulative professional disadvantage. And so what are some other things that you can do to advocate for equity and inclusion? Communicate that diversity is valued in your workplace and at the institutional level. Learn more about your own unconscious biases. And so I invite you to take the Harvard Implicit Attitudes Test. It's free. All you have to do is Google Harvard Implicit Bias Test. And it's actually a whole number of tests that you can take. And so you can test your bias in terms of gender, in terms of LGBTQ issues, in terms of disability, in terms of a number of issues. And so I've taken it and found that I am human. I have biases too. Yeah, it's really revealing. And it's just so important for us to normalize the fact that we all have implicit bias. Your born with it, you know, you're socialized into it. And so it's not about, oh, I'm not biased. It's about recognizing what your biases are and thinking about ways to prevent their impact in the workplace. And then finally, you can take advantage of campus opportunities to learn more. And so DEI does a number of seminars, and just we have a number of educational opportunities that we provide to the campus. The ethnic and student resource centers are amazing. And so another place to get more information, as well as the ethnic, gender, sexuality studies and research institutes. So just a couple more points here before we talk a little bit about the university strategic plan. In terms of our staff and supervisors, we really want to build their competencies around these issues of inclusion. And so I want to offer that a systems thinking approach may be really helpful to build those staff and supervisor capacities to close opportunity gaps in UNM's workforce. We may find it useful to encourage supervisors to complete evidence-based training, to address issues of implicit bias, and to understand the systematic cumulative disadvantages encountered by some of our staff. And it also may be helpful to educate ourselves about the benefits of diversity for innovative thinking. And I think I might have a couple of examples of that to share with you. Yes, here we are. So in a controlled experiment of performance during a brainstorming session where ideas were generated by a ethnically diverse group on one hand and a homogeneous group on the other, there were evaluators who didn't know who was in which group. And they found out that in terms of feasibility and effectiveness, that they rated the ideas generated by diverse groups as being of higher quality. And so just getting back to that idea that we want to guard against implicit bias, we want to be more inclusive because the results in terms of whatever you're doing in your workplace will be better. We could further promote behavioral strategies to address bias, including all those that were on that slide that I mentioned before in terms of counter-stereotypic imaging, exemplars in leadership positions, and also creating training methods that are aimed at reducing stereotype threat and increasing both interest and efficacy. So thinking about culturally relevant examples, and creating more participatory and active on-the-job training and internship programs that create supportive work environments and build toward an inclusive work culture. So to conclude this part of the presentation, to create an inclusive work environment, it's really crucial that we honor employees' varied cultural backgrounds and support them holistically with professional development and advancement opportunities. Inclusive practices really are incomplete if we expect to bring employees from diverse groups to UNM and then ask them to simply assimilate. To be truly inclusive and to ensure that we enjoy the intellectual benefits of diversity, we must ultimately expand the workplace culture to incorporate the interests and epistemologies of employees from the many communities, both domestic and international, represented within our faculty and staff ranks. So next, I wanted to talk a little bit about our planning in DEI for the University 2040 Strategic Plan. And I'm trying to find where I am in my notes here. And so I'll first just share with you the charge that came to DEI, and I'll just take a step back and say that, as many of you know, Provost Holloway is coordinating the strategic planning process for the entire university. And he set up 7 task forces that are writing different aspects of the strategic plan. And so DEI has been charged to take a look at the diversity planning in the university plan, in the university strategic plan. And so here's our charge. Keeping in mind the overall goal of enhancing diversity, equity, and inclusion at UNM, we are to establish a university diversity value statement, which we would love to bring back to you at some point and get your feedback on it. We have a pretty good draft that we're working on now. Secondly, to identify and coordinate the university-wide strategy for increasing demographic diversity. And so that goes back to that data I showed you at the beginning of the presentation in terms of the breakdown in regards to gender and race and ethnicity of our staff at UNM. And then finally, to work to improve the climate through greater inclusion. So we're interested in your ideas for increasing diversity and retention of staff from racial ethnic minority groups, as well as other underutilized is the affirmative action term, but other underrepresented groups, as I've noted on the slide, not only just in terms of staff generally, but also in terms of leadership positions at UNM. And so here I give you a list of some of the proposed strategies for diversity, equity, and inclusion in the 2040 strategic plan. And I won't read them all to you. I'll just note the ones that are asterisked, which I thought were most relevant to staff. So, excuse me, so better coordination and communication of DEI efforts across colleges, a strengthening of equity and inclusion infrastructure, a focus on staff retention by working with HR on their training curriculum for emerging women leaders, and also by establishing a training curriculum for diversity advocates, and finally by providing support to ethnic studies departments and institutes. Addressing climate concerns through the climate survey that we would like to do every 4 years, and tackling the physical, built, and virtual environment. And then finally examining HR search processes and offering recommendations to reduce implicit bias. And so in our discussion, I would very much like to ask about your suggestions, not only in terms of these 8 items, but other ways that you would like to see us center staff in the UNM 2040 strategic plan. So we're going to finish up here, and this is the last slide. So thank you so much for the opportunity to discuss the advantages of creating an inclusive work culture and ways to reduce the impact of implicit bias, it should say. We look forward to partnering with you over the next several months to learn your thoughts about staff-centered considerations in the UNM 2040 strategic plan. Inclusion today is the key to innovation tomorrow. Our efforts will help us to grow the reputation of UNM and produce leaders in the workforce who enhance both equity and inclusion in their respective fields. And so I am going to stop sharing my screen so I can see your questions and we can have discussion. Let's see here, there we go.
Okay. And Dr. Zerai, I'm not sure if you can see the questions.
Not yet. So chat or Q&A?
Q&A. And if you go to answered, I just let them know we were answering at the end of the presentation.
Okay. So the first question I see is, what is the best way to get the slide deck? And so what we're going to do is to post it on our DEI website. And that is just diverse.unm. Is that right? Lorena?
Yes, diverse.unm.edu.
So yeah, I think we can get it up there by tomorrow. Lorena, you think that would be all right?
Absolutely.
Okay. So yeah, we'll have them up on the website tomorrow. I'm going to go to answered. How do you create spaces that celebrate conflict so that conflict is viewed as an opportunity to problem solve from a different lens than the norm, rather than as an attack? That is an amazing question. And I actually wrote a whole book on this. I was looking at multi-racial, multicultural churches, and the ways that they moved from being all white churches to being multicultural, and kind of what it took to get there, and also what it took to continue to survive, because many of those churches end up kind of falling apart. Not just because they're multicultural, but yeah, they don't always last. And so one of the things that I found in my research is that for an organization such as UNM, it's really important to create spaces of collaboration. And so, you know, it's kind of hard to just talk about this in the abstract. At one of the churches, for example, that I looked at in my research, they had a coffee shop, kind of a coffee hour at the end of the service every week. And I'll just back up just to say that this was occurring during the 60s and 70s. And this was at a campus church. And so, you know, there was a lot of social protests. It's kind of similar to the moment we're in now. A lot of social protests happening at that time, because there was protest over the Vietnam War, and then protest over, you know, specific issues within that community, where African Americans in particular, and progressive whites and conservative whites who were in the leadership of the church I looked at, had very different views. And so that coffee hour that they had at the end of the service every week was a place where they would come together, they'd argue through issues, but they would work through those issues with empathy, because, you know, they're in the same church, so they loved each other, and they really did want to come to an understanding of, you know, the different sides of the arguments. And so in the campus setting, and the kind of work I do as Vice President for Equity and Inclusion, it's always important for me to find ways to bring along the community in terms of decisions that the campus is making about any issue. And so the SEAL, the University SEAL, for example, is a wonderful example of that, where Dr. De Leon and Lorena and others who were here many years before I arrived, did that hard work of coordinating forums and creating spaces so people could talk through the issues of why we needed a new university seal. And so, you know, for you to think in your specific setting about, you know, what is going to be that creative, innovative process where you can create that space of conversation is really important. Now, of course, there are going to be times when, you know, we've been in emergency planning, COVID emergency planning for many months now. And it continues because it's not something that's predictable. You know, we all thought that things would be better by now, we'd be coming back, you know, with, you know, some tweaks, but, you know, that we'd be coming back and everything would be good. Well, our effective is getting worse in the state. And it's just a moving target. And so sometimes you're in that crisis planning mode where it's really difficult to get in those different ideas. And often it's just important for your leadership to set that culture and that intention that all ideas are welcome. You know, we're going to consider all perspectives so that we can get to the best solution of the problem, even during a crisis. All right, and so next question. How do we ensure that our leadership is diverse? UNM has had diverse staff, in parentheses, could be better, but not necessarily at the leadership levels. So assistant directors, directors, executive directors, and vice presidents. And so I think with, you know, the hiring of President Garnett Stokes, that there has been a very clear intention and intentionality around making sure that when we do hires, that we have pools of applicants that are diverse. So in the affirmative action literature and practice, that is like the gold standard, to make sure that at least people have the opportunity to be considered. You know, once they have the opportunity to be considered, it's all about, you know, their qualifications. But often we're not even getting people into those pools of applicants. And so in affirmative action, we talk about something called good faith efforts. And if the federal government comes to do a examination of how well you're complying to those standards, one of the things that they take a very close look at is your good faith efforts. And so where are you recruiting? You know, where are you posting your job ad? Are you doing recruiting work off times? And so if you have a conference, a national conference that you're going to annually, are you meeting with people and, you know, just kind of keeping your eye open for possible people that you would want to invite to apply the next time you have an assistant director, or executive director position that comes open? And so those things are all very important. The other thing that has been shown, not only in the literature, but I have seen to be very effective in practice, is that you are talking about implicit bias when you call that search committee or hiring committee together. That you are taking the time to be able to really carefully look at all those applications, because you remember those shortcuts I talked about. Those shortcuts are like the kiss of death when it comes to making sure that you have a diverse pool in your finalist pool. And so there's much more that I could say about this. And so if you have other questions, please pose them. But I've spent a good part of my career actually thinking about this. And so if this is something that you would like me to discuss with you in your specific setting or around a specific search, we have lots of resources that we can offer to you to help you with ensuring that our leadership is diverse, especially in terms of any new hires that you have. So Barbara has asked this question: how do our demographics compare with those of the city and state and demographics of the student body? So unfortunately, I've not had a chance to take a look at how our staff demographics compare with our state. But one of the things that I am aware of, and also I'm not quite sure if you're talking about just staff compared to just staff or our student body. It does say demographics of the student body. So in terms of the student body, undergrad students in particular, there are a couple of points that I can mention. One is that we definitely could build better capacity in terms of building a bridge from our public schools throughout the state to UNM. There is a lot that can be done there. And so one of the issues that we have here, which we actually had at my prior institution in Illinois, is that our faculty, our instructors, our teachers throughout the elementary and secondary schools in the state are not as diverse as they could be. We don't have enough teachers. Many of them have emergency credentials. And because our teachers are not as diverse as our student bodies, often this means that culturally relevant pedagogy is not being brought into the classroom. And so we have kids that are coming into these classrooms and just checking right out because they don't feel that what they're learning in our elementary and secondary schools is relevant to their everyday lives. It's only when we make that education relevant that we actually teach to the person and not teach some abstract curriculum, that we're going to get the kids engaged and excited and on that trajectory to coming to UNM. And so building that pathway is very important. And so it's not my expectation that our student body completely reflects the state, but I actually don't have that data at my fingertips. Okay, so let me go to the open to questions. What specific concrete outcomes is the university accountable for in the strategic plan? And so as you may or may not be aware, we were actually working pretty hard on the strategic plan around November, moving into January, and then of course COVID hit. And so much of the work for the strategic plan has been put on hold. DEI has been fortunate that we've been able to work on a plan for increasing the diversity of our faculty in particular. We're starting to work on the plan in terms of increasing the diversity of our staff. And so, as I said, I'm really interested in your comments on ways that we can center staff in the 2040 strategic plan. We've started also working on aspects of increasing our numbers of graduate students. And then in terms of undergrads, the main focus has been on creating stronger equity in our gateway courses. And so those courses that have high fail and withdrawal rates, we are trying to bring in aspects that are more culturally relevant to those courses. And I see that Nancy Lopez has joined us. And so that's a big part of her portfolio. And Nancy, I welcome you if you would like to say a little bit more about what we're doing. But in terms of the accountability, what we're planning to do is to set benchmarks. And so we're setting benchmarks in terms of our numbers and percentages of faculty over time, and that's increasing and improving. And I would love to talk to the staff council about the types of benchmarks they think would be appropriate for staff in staff positions. Maybe looking at promotion rates would be something that you all would like to look at. Yeah, and so in terms of each of the 8 items that we're working on, we will have specific benchmarks, and we will look at those on an annual basis to make sure we're moving in that right direction to meet the goal that we've set for 2040. And so Nancy, let me just give you a quick second in case you wanted to say a bit about gateway equity.
Absolutely. I'm not sure that my camera is working. I think it has to be activated, but my name is Nancy Lopez. I am faculty in the sociology department. I'm a professor there. I also direct and co-founded the Institute for Race and Social Justice. And one of the things that we're doing is creating a community of practice around evidence-based, culturally relevant, culturally sustained.
Darn it. Lorena, I was trying to make her a co-host and I think I accidentally deleted her. Can you bring her back?
Yes, I'll work on that.
And then make her a co-host. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry, Nancy. We'll give her a minute to do that and I'll start answering another question until she gets here. Sorry about that, everyone. Zoom issues. Oh, there she is. Okay, so Nancy, sorry about that. That is my bad. I was trying to make you a co-host so they could see you.
Yes, it still doesn't allow. Oh, there it is. There's my camera. So thank you so much for that question. I think that we're working on building capacity and we're working in coordination with the Center for Teaching Excellence, as well as the Provost Social Justice Fellows, the Institute for Race and Social Justice, Diversity Council, and all of the ethnic studies programs, Africana, Chicano studies, Native American studies, women's studies that have built capacity around these issues. And our hope is to pilot some questions that ask us to think about how we bring student cultural wealth in the classroom and how our identities shape our teaching so that we engage in that critical self-reflexivity around our own experiences and social locations and identities. So we are hoping that we can create evidence-based and also a community of practice where we share ideas and strategies. And one of the other things that's particularly relevant for our staff is, as of 2018, the Staff Council did vote to include a demonstrated commitment to equity and inclusion in all of the job ads. And one question that I would love some feedback on is how we make sure that we have rubrics that help us assess that in whatever type of staff position, whether it's an advising position, whether it's a position that entails working directly with students or building maintenance. What does that look like in your context, right? Equity and inclusion. So any ideas you have about rubrics that would help us assess that, that would be great.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nancy. Very much appreciate that. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and go to, I saw a really cool question here in the chat. And Nancy, you and I can both talk about this if you would like. And so the question is, could you elaborate on the relationship between climate change and equity and inclusion? What can I, as an engineer, do to improve equity and inclusion through work on climate change? And so one of the things that I would offer is that there is an iChange, I standing for Institutional Change Initiative, that the APLU has been involved with. And what they have is kind of a toolkit in terms of the first thing you do is a self-assessment to take a look at ways that your climate kind of falls short in terms of being an inclusive one. And then they provide a whole set of resources and suggestions for ways that you can alter your climate. And so in terms of, you know, I'm a social scientist and, you know, I have that scientific mind. And so that's the way I think about it. I think about, you know, what is the problem? Let's diagnose the problem. You know, what are the tools to address the problem? And, you know, so we can get to the solution. What are the evidence-based tools so we can get to the solution that we're working toward? And so, you know, that's the way my mind works. And so I just really love that iChange tool. And so if you all would like to have a conversation with us about that, I'm happy to share that tool with you and help talk that through with you. If you're in the School of Engineering, I'm sure that Mala Tun also would love to work with us on this. Nancy, is there anything that you wanted to offer for that?
I think there's multiple opportunities to include assignments even in our respective units or with our students to think about these critical questions that are incredibly important. So I haven't thought specifically about climate change, but there is a huge evidence base on what could be done. I know that when I travel internationally, I look at other campuses and what they're doing, and I wonder why it's seldom the case that we are thinking about those things, whether it's solar, whether it's recycling, whether it's building use. So there's a lot of expertise on our campus that can help us think more creatively about how we engage in strategic investments in reducing our carbon footprint. So it's a great question. Thank you.
Oh, that's interesting, because I was thinking of it in terms of inclusive climate, and you're talking about, you know, like the world climate. So I'm not quite sure what he was meaning, what this person was meaning with this question, but yeah, okay. That's really interesting. I think another thing, Nancy, in terms of your work, is that when you create a more inclusive climate in your classroom, then that builds the pathway where students are going to be more interested in graduate school. And so, you know, having an impact on that lab space and, you know, creating an inclusive graduate climate in the department, because students don't just come there as automatons. They come in and bring in their culture and you know, we want to welcome them to influence that climate. And then that pathway all the way to faculty, so that then they're coming back and giving back in terms of improving that climate.
And one specific data point that would be important, especially for graduate students, but also for undergrads, is capturing first-generation college status. So to what degree are we assessing our data when we conduct climate studies in a way that allows us to examine the experience by first-generation status, race, gender, tribal affiliation, etc. So all of those things, LGBT status, immigrant status, international students, all of those things are incredibly important.
Thank you so much. Okay, so Nicole has posed this question. Given all the budget issues we're currently dealing with, how does economic financial diversity play into this conversation? For instance, staff who make under $50,000 a year are arguably more heavily impacted by the retraction of the 4% raise or the furloughs happening at other institutions. And so, you know, there have not been discussions about furloughs here, and so we'll set that one aside. I know that in earlier discussions that considerations of individuals making under 50 a year were something that we're focused on. But I don't really know where we are with that right now. Ideally, if we did have a 1% raise or something available to us, ideally that the focus of that funding would be on our colleagues that are making 50,000 a year or less. So yeah, those are my initial thoughts about that. Okay, I'm looking. I think I've asked the questions in the chat. Now we're going back to Q&A. Okay, so there's an anonymous question here. How do we make sure that the ethnic centers are also promoted in the 2040 vision, since they get left out of so many conversations and their staff are the lowest paid in the job titles that they fall under? And so to the extent that staff in the ethnic centers are the lowest paid, we definitely could do an equity review of those salaries. In terms of the ethnic centers generally, they are very active in our diversity council. And so the plans and discussions around the strategic planning and the diversity input to it specifically have been brought into the Diversity Council. And so we're actually very much looking forward to the input of ethnic centers in terms of ways that we can center them. Nancy, do you have any ideas on this one?
I think that's such an important question because money is policy. So if we look and investigate if there's any inequities in pay for not only the staff that work in the ethnic centers, but also for the programs, the academic units that concentrate their work in this, then if we discover any inequities, we have to make sure that we address them. I hope that this would present an opportunity for that kind of work. And I hope that we can be a leader in the nation.
Thank you so much. Okay, and so the next question, just checking our time here. All right. You had mentioned about becoming an advocate for diversity in the 8 components for the UNM 2040 strategic plan. Will there be opportunities within DEI to volunteer and to be an official advocate for diversity for our respective departments? That's a question that I really love because yes, we are planning to create a training and educational curriculum around this so that we can have a cadre of diversity advocates who can help to serve on hiring and search committees, who can help with decision-making in units. This is a relatively new endeavor that we're taking on. And Lorena Blanco Silva is actually one of the people who's been working on this. And so just give her a quick minute if she would like to say a few words. She's been working with EOD, for example, on this.
That's right. Thank you, Dr. Zerai. So one of the things that we're doing is we're going to work with EOD. There's actually some implicit bias modules that currently exist within Learning Central, but we want to take it a step further. So we're in the process of designing a diversity certificate program, and it follows kind of the way ULEAD works, where it's a career ladder, but this one's going to be specific to diversity issues. So we're super excited to partner with EOD and to really put together a certificate program. There'll probably be 2 different sessions in the spring. Look for more information about it. We're still designing the curriculum. We're going to work with some of our great faculty and some of our great staff who are doing a lot of this work, like Dr. Nancy Lopez, for example, of course, Dr. Zerai, and several other folks around campus to design this curriculum to really make a culture shift at UNM. By the more people that participate in this kind of program and learn more, that they'll be able to take that back to their departments and become really big advocates for us and for diversity, equity, and inclusion within their units and then more broadly. So thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And before you go away, I'm going to ask you the next question, Lorena, because it's something you're working on. Okay. So is UNM going over training materials on Learning Central to take some of the stereotype and bias info out of it? And this person also indicates, even the COVID training has some graphics that I find offensive. For example, minorities as admins, etc.
I haven't seen the COVID training yet, but I'll be on the lookout for it. I haven't gone through it personally yet, but yes, that's one of the things is that we are working very closely with EOD to review the training materials currently being used, with the idea that we're going to be able to do things that really impact our campus, because some of the training is very macro and sort of a higher level, but we really are seeing certain issues at our campus and at UNM. And we work very closely also with OEO. So that's one of the things. So they'll help us identify the direction that we should be going in, pending the number of complaints or the issues that we have around certain issues. We'll be able to kind of address those issues first and then zoom out a little bit and work in a broader way, because that's really important to us, is that we're being very mindful of our particular campus and not just doing diversity training in a very generic kind of way, but really specific to the issues that are impacting our campus.
Thank you so much. That's awesome. So here's another question for us all, and I'll actually, once I've read it, take over the screen for a quick section, because Nancy sent me a wonderful slide that is very apropos. So I've heard that how job postings are written can be biased. If that's true, can UNM work toward creating job postings that attract more diverse applicants? And so, hoping that I can do this sooner rather than later, there we are. So I think you can see my screen. So actually, we have, and unfortunately I have to click through every single slide. We have created, darn it. Here we are. We have created preferred criteria in terms of hiring on campus. And this is a little bit hard to read, but back in 2014, the university determined that on the recommendation of the Diversity Council, that the following language be added to all open competitive postings for faculty appointments as preferred qualifications. And so one of the things that we could think about for the 2040 plan is that we would like to bring this into all staff appointments as well. And so I'll try my best to read it because it's really small. And that wording is a demonstrated commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and student success, as well as working with broadly diverse groups. So I'm gonna let go of the screen share now. And one of the things that the literature shows is that when you have this kind of wording in your job ad, you're going to automatically attract groups, individuals from diverse groups. The other thing that you can do to attract more diverse groups in terms of the wording of your ad, or actually the requirements of the application, is to ask applicants to provide evidence of their work in terms of diversity and inclusion. And so, Nancy, would you like to talk about how this has been adapted by the Staff Council?
Absolutely. So in 2018, we had the pleasure of sharing this strategy that we adopted for faculty ads from 2014 with the Staff Council, and through a vote of the Staff Council, that language was adopted. And as I mentioned earlier, we are really looking forward to developing rubrics depending on what the particular staff position is that would help us assess how this is working. How do you measure a demonstrated commitment to equity and inclusion? Is it enough to say, oh, I love diversity, without showing that you have a track record of thinking about first-generation college students, that you have a track record of thinking about the LGBTQ community, the undocumented student community, students who have traditionally been underrepresented on our campus, and other staff? So again, that could look very different for someone who's working in physical plan and is thinking about the design or the ways in which we are accommodating students that might have different needs in terms of navigating space, bathroom space. Do we have a universal restroom? All of those kinds of things. It might look very different if you're an academic advisor. It may look very different if you are a senior level administrator, but the point is, our job ad is a value statement. And when we say that this is a preferred criteria, our hope is that it's a minimum criteria. Because in reality, we know that the demonstrated commitment to equity and inclusion can be demonstrated by people who are from racial and ethnic minority groups, but it could also be demonstrated by people who are not. And just because you are a member of an underrepresented group doesn't mean that you have a demonstrated commitment. So this really helps us to assess what are the job qualifications that would enhance our portfolio of staff, faculty that add to our mission.
Thank you so much. And I see that Liz Hutchinson has also joined us. Liz, did you have anything that you wanted to say about this or any of the other topics that have been discussed this afternoon?
Sure, thank you, Assata. I'm Liz Hutchison, faculty in history, and now working with the Division for Equity and Inclusion, and my video won't turn on, so I'll just say briefly that I saw in the Q&A that someone asked a question really about respect and respect accorded to staff in a university context. And I thought it would be important to say that part of my work with the Division of Equity and Inclusion is to bring best practices in the prevention of sexual harassment and its intersection with other vulnerable identities to UNM in an attempt to really look at the kinds of power relationships that divide and often make staff feel unappreciated, vulnerable, and take more seriously the need for accountability by those who may not use their power well, and also to address aspects of whistleblowing and retaliation that we know we have gaps that need to be addressed in terms of both staff, faculty, and students. But I would say in an urgent way with respect to staff on our campus. So thank you. I just wanted to add that to the question of how we address the climate, not only through education, but also through accountability.
Thank you so much. And I think you can turn on your camera now.
Oh, so that I can wave.
There
Hi,
you are.
everybody.
All right, thank you so much for that. Okay, let's see here. I think we have just a few more minutes left. So someone is asking about whether the demographics of the university faculty and staff is reflective of the communities around us. And I know, Nancy, that for the International ACAC, you looked at the data in terms of New Mexico. Do you have an answer to that? Because I actually have not looked at that data and I don't want to just make an opinion on it.
So right now, you know that we're in the midst of collecting data for the 2020 census. The last day to respond is October 31st. And one of the other hats I wear as co-chair of the UNM Complete Count Committee. This is a civil rights issue. This is an issue that will impact not only institutions of higher ed, but our K-12 schools, et cetera. It is incredibly important that we prioritize getting a full count for New Mexico. We are behind. Right now, the national average is in the 60% response, and we are in the low 50s. And as you can imagine, it's the communities that have traditionally been undercounted. It's incredibly important to point out that we do not have a citizenship question. I know there's been a lot of fear around that, but there is no citizenship question. Your data are confidential. So to answer the question about to what degree does our student population reflect the community at large, we know that about half the state is Latino, and that we have about 10% that is Native American and much smaller percentages of Black and Asian. So it is to some degree, but it's not necessarily where we should be. And also we have to look at outcomes. So is it enough to have a demographic student body that looks diverse, but if we look at outcomes, they're not, and how important it is to look at outcomes by social location, what we call a category of experience. So our first generation Native men graduating at the same rate as first generation white women or Latina women. In other words, we need to look at complex inequalities. So to answer the question, we are better on average than most universities in terms of reflecting the demographics of the state. However, there's a lot of work that we can do in terms of innovations that are based on evidence-based practices that increase student success for all, but particularly those students who have traditionally been underrepresented in graduation rates and in graduate school. So I think we have a golden opportunity now to be the leaders again in the nation for eradicating these inequities and creating what my colleague Ruth Zambrana, who wrote a wonderful book called Toxic Ivory Towers and the Health Consequences of Racism for Underrepresented Faculty, to create equity lifts. So if we see an inequity, then we are going to address it rather than ignore it. And this again requires a focus on complex inequalities, looking at race, gender, and first generation college status together to see if we see an inequity and how we're going to address it.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful. I'm so happy we had an opportunity to make that tie to the census.
Yes.
That's work that's near and dear to many of us.
Absolutely.
Okay. So Lorena has noted that we are capturing questions, and Lorena, I lost it. You want to just pop one and let folks know the plan for the questions and answers?
Yeah, we're capturing the questions. Those that have names that aren't anonymous, we will do our best to address them and post them to the DEI website, along with the recording of today's webinar and the slide deck that Dr. Zerai used earlier. So if there's something that you didn't get in, and you can always email us any questions to diverse@unm.edu, and I'll put that in the chat. So everybody, please, we check that email frequently. It's our generic diverse DEI one, and then we'll direct them to where appropriate and make sure you get an answer to your question if you're asking a question anonymously but would like a response.
Thank you so much. So we just have about 5 minutes left. I think we've answered most of the questions. I've tried my best to get to all of them. But I do want to return back to the question I had for you all in terms of ways that you would like to see staff centered in the 2040 strategic plan. And so if you would like to invite us back sometime to talk to the Staff Council, or if the Staff Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee would like to have a conversation about this, we're very sincere in wanting to make sure that we find ways to center staff. And I don't want to do this as kind of a top-down, we figure it out all out. We want to do it as a conversation and make sure that we're bringing in your authentic ideas in terms of that. All right, just looking at the questions one more time. So for my colleagues, Nancy, Lorena, and Liz, do you all have any final comments in our last 3 minutes?
No, just to thank you all for being involved and engaged, that we need your leadership, we need your wisdom, your insight, your ideas, and that we absolutely look forward to partnering with you and creating a space at UNM that is welcoming and empowering for all. And we're grateful for your participation. If you have any ideas, again, I mentioned the demonstrated commitment to equity and inclusion, or any aspect of what the marvelous presentation that Dr. Zerai gave us, just email us, diverse@unm.edu, or directly our own emails. Thank you.
So actually, before you go, Nancy, I found another question here that's you specifically. So in regards to Equity Gateway, are there talks about changing the composition of courses to have multiple sections with various subject matter with the same skill building, that may be more culturally relevant to different populations?
Absolutely, and there's a number of initiatives underway currently. There's several, the eCure Collective, there's also the First Generation Experience, or CEP. So we are working on all of that, and we are creating that community of practice that we mentioned on evidence-based pedagogy that's culturally sustaining, revitalizing, and responsive. We know that this can be a lever for reducing inequality in educational outcomes, and it's our ethical responsibility to do that. So absolutely, and please reach out. I can give you more information on that.
Thank you so much. I see that a question popped in about UNMPD, asking about setting goals for the police department that link with the demographics of our community. And so I am one of the newest members of the Campus Safety Council. And so that is something that we're talking about pretty fiercely, trying to address. Stay tuned. There will be a panel discussion coming up on UNMPD. We know that there are a lot of questions about the work of our police department here on campus, and in the midst of the social protest that's been happening. Just again, lots of questions. And so we right now are working on the details of that. So stay tuned. Take a look at our DEI website, and also you will see it in the president's message and all over the place once we get the details nailed down for that. So what else can we answer in one more minute? Okay, so this, we'll do this final question. Staff who are not from higher ed, who did not earn degrees, have worked long-term in the higher ed academic setting and are stereotyped as less educated. Yet years of service and experience surpasses others in hiring pools and are still not taken into consideration for positions. How has that been addressed? And so I know within the diversity literature and at my prior institution, one of the things that we did was to take a look at all of the staff positions to examine the requirements, because sometimes a BA or a BS is required for a position when that's not really a part of what's needed for the job, and that on-the-job training that you've had in terms of those years of experience are actually, that's more valuable for those positions. And so what I would suggest there is that we do a review of those job ads and requirements so that we can make sure that we're not just privileging people who have degrees. And so with that, I think that pushes us over past the 1:30 hour. So again, I want to thank my colleagues, Nancy Lopez, Liz Hutchinson, Lorena Blanco Silva, so much for joining us today. I want to thank Joseph Lane and the Staff Council for inviting us to have this conversation with you. And thank you so very much for joining us today. This has been a rich discussion, and we really are looking forward to more of these kinds of discussions in coming months. So take care of yourselves, please stay safe, and hopefully we'll see you on the quad sometime soon. All righty, bye.
All right, thank you everyone. And just a reminder that the Staff Council business meetings are open to everyone to participate as attendees. So if you want to step in, even if you're not a staff counselor, you are more than welcome to participate in those meetings and you'll get notifications about that. Thank you everybody. Thank you Dr. Zerai, Dr. Lopez, Dr. Hutchinson, Joseph, everybody for being with us today. And as we mentioned, this will be available on the DEI website, and it'll also be available over at staff councils. So thank you.
Thank you.
Gracias.
Adios.